but this is now being recorded.
Yeah, so we have like a countdown usually, but not this time. So hello and welcome to the In the Tank podcast, episode 226, the podcast that explores the work of think tanks across the country. And for those that are just listening to the audio version, you are missing out on our beautiful faces because we are back on video. It only took months of me bugging people to get this back up and running, but we are, and we're looking good. Looks like some of us dressed up, others not so much, but we have a full house today, as you can see if you are watching us on YouTube. So joining us today, let's see, we've got Justin Haskins, the editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. Unfollow him on Twitter. How are you, sir?
I was doing well until you just attacked me.
That's
just a horrible attack. Yeah, horrible attack. I think, I've been thinking about this a lot. And what I've realized is that I've been watching.
We have Isaac Orr, policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. How are you, good sir?
I'm great. Thank you for asking.
You're very welcome.
Justin, that's all you have to say.
Also, Jim Lakely, Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Glad we're back live streaming video. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. And in that corner there, we gave him a camera.
I got a cam.
And he's got a mic. He is Andy, the producer extraordinaire. Andy, give it up for yourself.
Give it up for Andy. Love it. Happy to be here.
So we got a couple of things we want to get to. Obviously, there was a debate this week. I'm not sure if anybody watched it. But
wait, there was a debate?
Yeah, exactly. Debate number 56 of the season.
It was the second lowest debate of the year. 7 million people. I saw that this morning. 7 million people. The one previous was 6 million people. So
we're going to talk about some demographic type things, states that are growing, states that are shrinking, and then we're going to get to some Republican healthcare plan items towards the end. I also have that proposed bill of the week, but we always run out of time before we get to it, so I have it here just in case. A couple of housekeeping items before we get going. So, new year, back on YouTube. Everyone that's just listening to the audio version, again, check us out on YouTube, see our beautiful faces. We're also exploring the idea of doing the show live. So if and when that happens, you'll be able to send us your comments on the spot, and we can respond to them if they're appropriate. So we'll do that. Also, email us in the tank podcast at gmail.com. Send us your comments, suggestions, questions, everything. We also this year want to do more interviews, have more guests come up on the show. So if you have any suggestions of people in the think tank policy world that you think would be a good thing to have on this podcast, send those comments and suggestions to in the tank podcast at gmail.com. All right. So
we got to get Schellenberger on yet.
I bug him all the time. Everybody listening to this podcast with an email, which is everybody, message this guy, Michael Schellenberger. Tell him to get on the podcast. I want to talk to him about nuclear power. What's going on, man? Why you ducking me?
Ducking me.
Yeah. All right. So we already kind of teased it. There was a Democratic debate. No, first, before we get to that, update Democratic survivor pool. This is a hit on Isaac. Cory Booker, the man himself, dropped out officially. Drops Isaac down to like third place, I think. You only have Buttigieg and Klobuchar in the race. Still, does anybody have any fond memories that they want to reminisce about Cory Booker before he just goes into the dustbin of this campaign? I've got one.
Yeah, I've got one too. What's yours?
Mine is when he got beaten to the punch by what's his face by speaking Spanish in that first debate.
Oh, by Beto?
Beto, yeah, Beto O'Rourke.
Oh man, it's pretty bad to get beat by Beto.
What was that? The same one as yours, Isaac? Do you have something better?
No, mine's just the incredibly classy tweet that POTUS put out after hearing the news.
Do you have it? Do you want to?
Yeah, I do. It's great. Really big breaking news. Parentheses. Kidding. Booker, who is in zero polling territory, just dropped out of the Democrat presidential primary race. Now I can rest easy tonight. I was so concerned that I would someday have to go head to head with him.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Anybody else? Fond memories of Cory Booker? I know he's very forgetful. What were the nicknames that he came up with? Spartacus?
I don't know. I don't care about Cory Booker. I hate his guts. But I will say this. He totally screwed me over here in our survivor pool because he was out of these debates for quite a while. There was no chance that he was going to win. There was no way that there was no reason for him to stay in the race. He knew he was going to get out. He didn't even bother lasting until Iowa and New Hampshire. And yet he chose to get out of the race like a week after Marianne Williamson got out of the race.
Yeah.
Why? Why, Cory? Why do you keep screwing me over with your stupid ideas and your ridiculous comments and now this? Go away and never come back.
He supported nuclear power.
Please. What does that mean? What does that even mean, Isaac? You think it's going to matter that he supported nuclear power when you're in a gulag? You think it's going to matter when that happens?
Yeah, I'm excited about it. It'll be a nuclear powered gulag.
Yeah.
Donnie is trying to talk right now, but it's not sounding like anything to me. Is anybody else having trouble hearing him?
On my end.
Yeah, I had a little bit of trouble.
Go ahead, Donnie, talk.
I'm talking. I'm talking all day.
Now I can hear you.
We're gonna cut all this out.
We couldn't hear you.
Gotta move forward, people. Move forward.
Hey, I can. We're trying, listeners. We're actually trying some new technology for the show moving forward, where we can share screens. I can share. People can see the live standings now for the.
Okay.
For the survivor pool, which is nice. I can, so you can see here, I am now in first place with 41, Isaac with 51, Justin 52, Andy 60, and Donnie bring up the rear at 66. But we've gone through. We've only got 10 left. Comrade Bernie is still the leading, the first round pick and the leading vote getter. But this is how we're running it. And guys, I actually thought. It would be, maybe we can juice this up. We can, so the Iowa caucuses are coming up. What is that? February 3rd or 4th, something like that. Right. And so since Donnie and Andy are so far out of it that we could, maybe there's a way that you can come back in. And so if you correctly select the top 5 people to finish in Iowa, exactly correct, you get minus 10 points. You get back. So it's open for everybody. You get back in the game.
Let's have a separate thing. We'll have a separate thing. But regardless of the.
All right, then great. I'll win it all. No problem. I'm happy with that.
Let's continue on. Let's swipe this aside since I'm in last place and it's irrelevant now. Let's talk about how last week, the timing of this is just perfect. Last week, I talked about how, what if Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren teamed up and became this progressive juggernaut that just took on the establishment type people, and wouldn't that be something that's possible? No, apparently not. Now they're at each other's throats, and it came to a head at this last debate in a very comical fashion. So I guess what happened, and Andy, feel free to pull up this clip. What happened was allegations came up recently that Bernie Sanders told Elizabeth Warren that she wouldn't be able to win the presidency because she's a woman. Was addressed during the debate because it is super important in the time that we're living in to explore these identity politics. So go ahead, play this.
Senator Sanders. CNN reported yesterday and Senator Warren confirmed in a statement that in 2018, you told her that you did not believe that a woman could win the election.
Pause.
Why did you?
No, I said that woman couldn't win the election. But no, let's actually hear what he has to say.
That.
Well, as a matter of fact, I didn't say it. And I don't want to waste a whole lot of time on this because this is what Donald Trump and maybe some of the media want. Anybody knows me, knows that it's incomprehensible that I would think that a woman could not be president of the United States. Go to YouTube today. There's a video of me 30 years ago talking about how a woman could become president of the United States.
All right, go ahead, pause that. So I don't know. What do you think? Is that genuine? Do you buy that? Because I tend to.
You tend to believe who?
Bernie Sanders. I don't think that he actually said that. I think that it was probably some type of comment that was taken out of context. But yeah, the idea that he would walk up to him and be like, you have 2 X chromosomes, you ain't gonna win. I don't buy it.
He definitely said it. He definitely said
Really?
it, but he didn't say it like women can't be president. He said it like America is full of a bunch of sexist people. And I don't think that they're necessarily ready to vote for a woman for president yet, because he's trying to talk her out of running. This is why they had their conversation. They left that part out. But the whole point of the conversation that they had was it was a closed door meeting for them to talk to each other about whether they both should run or only one of them should run, or that was widely reported at the time. That was the point of the conversation. So I'm sure he said to her, you know, America's too sexist to elect a woman. Look at what happened to Hillary. You know, they're not going to vote for you. So it was more like that. It wasn't, you know, all women can't be president the way that she's suggesting. But
well, I guess, Justin, your dream of a Bernie Liz ticket is down the tubes. Just last week, you were saying how that was a possibility.
Yeah, it's dead. It's dead. They killed it. Because they're stupid. And so just from a political standpoint, they are so dumb. These people are so dumb because they have absolutely no chance of winning if they're both in the race and they stay in the race. Neither of them can win as long as that happens. So why wouldn't one of them get out? One of them has to get out. That's the only way.
Themselves.
These are politicians. They've got the egos of elephants.
I know.
Well, no, I'm just going to go ahead and say this. Like, neither of them are actually that good with numbers. None of them are realistic when it comes to math. So why are we suddenly surprised that they're not willing to make like realistic calculations based on what their odds are if they both stay in?
That is a very valid point. But I want to continue this clip because it goes on a little bit further, and I think that this is kind of revealing of just the current state of the media. Go ahead and hit that.
Oh yeah, I hope it's me. But if they do, I will do everything in my power to make sure that they are elected in order to defeat the most dangerous president in the history of our country.
So Senator Sanders, I do want to be clear here. You're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
Senator Warren, what did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman could not win the election?
Go ahead and
I
pause
disagreed.
Oh my God.
That is like just the comedic timing of that. Like, just makes it seem like this is like out of a movie. It's so ludicrous.
Saturday Night Live's cold opens aren't that funny.
Right.
That is ridiculous. I mean, you know me, I love ripping on the media because I'm a recovering journalist myself, and I know very well the way the White House press corps and the Washington press corps work. I mean, for crying out loud, Liz Warren is a known and congenital liar. She lies about her ancestry. She lied about her ancestry to get jobs at Harvard. She lies about being fired because she was pregnant. And the journalists and she leaks this story to CNN. And CNN says they independently corroborated it by talking to other people in Liz Warren's campaign, and then call Liz Warren again and say, "Is this true?" And she says yes. And that is called on CNN independently corroborating this story. Yeah. And then they have the gall to just completely take her at her word. And despite what Bernie said, and I actually believe his denials on this, and you at least should take it at face value, immediately turns around and says, Elizabeth Warren, what do you think when he said that women couldn't be president? I mean, he laughed, the audience laughed, and actually Bernie should have interrupted and said, hold on, wait a minute, this is garbage or something. All he did was kind of half shrug and chuckle, and then that was the end of it. It took the rest of the world. It takes conservatives to defend Bernie Sanders to the media. That's how bad CNN is.
He can't say anything, because if he says something, then he's denying a woman's accusation against a man, which is what this is all about. Ultimately, They can't question anything that she said, because if they can question her in this situation, then why can't they question any woman in any situation? And as we all know, women never lie.
That's true, unless they're Republican. There's a couple of articles about this stuff on Reason, which I'll link to. But one thing that they talk about is the fact that on Twitter, Hashtag CNN is trash was trending, which was a fantastic. Just reading through all of those comments was just that was a fun time in itself. But I think Isaac mentioned it's just like, yeah, we've been on this train for a long time.
Just like, oh, welcome to the party, folks.
yeah, it's so that's a joke. There was another scene. I don't think we have to play it. We're at the end. There was kind of like
oh no, that's the best scene.
You want to do it?
We have to.
That's a great scene.
All right, fine. Let's play it.
It's the best part of that entire interaction.
All right, so this is after the debate ended, and everyone's kind of shaking each other's hands. And there was I don't think you would call it a hot mic, but they released the audio of the clip itself. So we have that one for us as well as soon as Andy pulls it up.
One moment.
There was an article. Okay, well, here it is.
With applause still ringing at the end of the Democratic debate in Iowa last night, the simmering feud between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders suddenly boiled over.
I think you called me a liar on national TV.
What?
I think you called me a liar on national TV.
Let's not do it right now. You want to have that discussion? We'll have that discussion. You called me. You told me. All right, let's not do it now. Yeah, good. Okay.
She walked away with
Okay, yeah, pause it.
It's like, does Elizabeth Warren think that she's like real life Jeopardy and she needs to phrase everything in the form of a question?
Yeah, the presidential aspect of it, we were just kind of looking at it. It's just like, just think of her as the commander in chief. I think you might have just bombed our air base. I think you did. Like, I don't know. That just came off as just terrible. Just absolutely awful.
She's so unlikable.
And in there like a dope, trying to get Bernie Sanders' autograph too at the end, which is a joke in itself.
Tom Steyer is the funniest part of that. It's like, here, can you put your signature right here? I got everybody else's signature. I got Liz's yesterday. Can you put Bernie? Can you sign my autograph book? This is great. And he completely blows him off. Yeah, okay, well, whatever.
Okay. All right. That's great. Thank you.
Well, of course. I mean, Tom Steyer is a billionaire. He hates billionaires. I don't know what Tom Steyer thought he was doing walking over there talking to him. He's lucky Bernie didn't punch him.
So constant listeners will know that I've said that like I don't like politics. I like policy. But these things are just too juicy to not talk about. It's just so entertaining, especially on the heels of the fact that like I was thinking that they were gonna somehow combine forces to take out Biden, but whatever. So to turn to policy while sticking with this debate, I do want to talk about another Reason article that did we just hear 3 Democratic candidates talk about reducing deficits and debt? So this goes through kind of some of the stuff in the debate. It says, so color me flabbergasted that not one, but 2 of the 6 candidates on stage tonight, Klobuchar and Buttigieg, said out loud even that they intend to reduce the deficit. So this was kind of interesting, and it goes through like what kind of their plans are, at least their rhetoric. It highlights, it's a copy and pasted from, I think, her website, Klobuchar's plan of how to tackle the debt. So it says, establish a dedicated fund to tackle the U.S. debt and support our economy. Senator Klobuchar will establish a dedicated fund to make a down payment to tackle the U.S. debt and protect our economy. She will initially seed the fund with $300 billion by raising the corporate tax rate and dedicating savings from government-wide budget review. When the economy is doing well, the fund will finance deficit reduction. So first off, I do want to get your opinions on this idea. The plan itself, her plan herself, and 2, the fact that they're even talking about it, because up until this point, there has been no debt talk. And the only other thing that I'll mention here before I get your opinions is that she said that she would initially seed the fund with $300 billion. Do you know what the interest on the debt alone was last year?
Yeah, it was about $300 billion.
$479 billion. So the fund won't even pay down the interest on the debt that we pay each year.
This is so ridiculous for a variety of reasons. I'm actually glad. I actually respect them more when they don't talk about the debt and deficit, because I think it insults everyone's intelligence when they do, as if they actually care about these things. They don't care about these things. They even cared about these things for years and years and years. Barack Obama, when he ran for president, once said that the debt that was incurred under the Bush administration was, quote, unpatriotic. And then he went on to spend more money than every other presidency in the entire history of the United States combined. He added more to the debt than all of those other presidents combined.
Right.
And now Trump is actually on pace to surpass Obama. None of these people care. That's the truth. The truth is nobody in Washington cares about the debt. Republicans, Democrats, whatever, they don't care. And the reason they don't care is very simple. There's no political benefit immediately to dealing with the debt and cutting spending. There's none. There's virtually none. Unless you live in a district with really conservative people that really care about this issue, there is no reason for you to care about it. And so they are never going to actually care. This is all just a lie. So I would prefer that they just say debt doesn't matter, because that's what they actually believe. So I would rather they say that.
Jim, I want to come to you, but I also want to mention that Buttigieg also expressed outrage during the debate that Donald Trump has presided over a return to trillion-dollar deficits and suggested that Democrats jump feet first into the issue. And then hilariously, Senator Elizabeth Warren actually talked about how her plans would actually bring down the national debt. This is the same person that's proposing a $52 trillion Medicaid for All plan, which is actually the largest. That program in itself, over the span of 10 years, represents the largest government ever made in the history of man, if you think about it. So the fact that they're even paying lip service to the idea of debt and deficits, Jim, do you think that this is a return to fiscal sanity, or it's just a little oasis of Dreamville?
To return to fiscal sanity, you would have had to had a time where we had fiscal sanity, and we haven't had fiscal sanity in any of our lifetimes, and probably not since our grandfathers or great-grandfathers' times. We haven't had fiscal sanity since the income tax and automatic withholding from our paychecks, which gives all the money to the Treasury and makes it easy for them to just spend. I think I would call it encouraging, but more like it's hilarious that people like Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren and probably Bernie Sanders soon will be talking about fiscal responsibility. It is just Republicans have not even given serious lip service to fiscal responsibility since the 1990s. The Gingrich Republican Revolution of 1994 talked about balanced budgets and we have to tackle the national debt, and we didn't, and we won't, and so Trump has spent even more than Bush did, even more than Clinton did, even more than Obama did, and it is really hard now. It's not a major issue in the country today. I don't think it's a winning political issue. It never really has been. The time for that was in the 1990s. There was momentum. There was an actual discussion, and people were convinced that the United States has to get its fiscal house in order. We've learned now over the last 20, 25 years that it seems to be. It doesn't matter if we have our fiscal house in order. Everything just moves along as fine. So we can just keep spending. We can keep promising. We can keep spending on defense. We can keep spending on new domestic programs. And there seems to be no real financial ramifications for this in a negative sense. Yeah. So it's kind of funny that Democrats who spend are giving it lip service, and they're only doing this because Donald Trump's the one doing all the spending. So chalk this up as yet one other thing that Donald Trump is for, which means the Democrats will go the opposite direction. But they'll only do that temporarily. As soon as Trump is gone, it's back to spend.
Yeah, I just want to point out one more thing. I just want to kind of repeat the thing that I just briefly mentioned. And it's the idea. So I looked this up. Federal government spending in a year is $4.74 trillion. So over 10 years, we're talking $47 trillion. And that's, I'm sure it will go up. So let's round up $50 trillion over the next 10 years that we're going to spend. Elizabeth Warren's Medicaid for All plan is $52 trillion over 10 years. That is literally more than doubling the size of the government. Again, that program itself represents a larger government than has ever been created.
Yeah, but all you need is 2 pennies on the dollar and we're fine.
2 cent tax. So we did have one other thing that we wanted to mention before we got to these topics. I don't know if we should get to it. It's that Project Veritas video of the Bernie Sanders campaign guy talking about putting Trump supporters in gulags. Should we skip that?
Wait, is this the guy that said he's going to burn Milwaukee unless...
No, Milwaukee will burn if Bernie Sanders is screwed out of his...
rightful nomination. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, as someone who's from Wisconsin, maybe Milwaukee needs a fresh start.
Yeah, I don't know if we need to play it. I'll put the link in the show notes.
He's putting it up now. Let's just play it.
Let's
He's
just
already
play
got
it.
it up.
Play some of it. It's
gets reelected. What? Cities burn.
turned down.
Do you think that some of these like mega people could even be re-educated?
I mean, we got to try. I mean, like in Nazi Germany, after the fall of the Nazi Party, there was a shit ton of the populace that was Nazified. And like Germany had to spend billions of dollars re-educating fucking people to not be Nazis. Like, we're probably going to have to do the same thing here. And that's kind of what Bernie's like, whole thing, like, hey, free education for everybody. We're going to have.
All right. The idea that like Bernie Sanders' actual plan of free education is actually to re-educate people into not being Nazis is fanciful thinking.
Which brings up the question of who are Nazis compared to these Bernie supporters?
Well, yes, everyone that voted for Trump, obviously.
Guess what? We're all Nazis.
He goes on. Don't say that. Now they're going to isolate that clip, and our podcast is over. But he goes on further to talk about gulags under Stalin and how they're actually better than the media portrays, and how they got conjugal visits and they got paid minimum wage for their labor. So gulags are actually not that bad, which is just a horrifying thing to even say. But I don't know. I don't think it's worth really getting into unless anyone's got something that they want to jump in. But we should move on to our topics at hand, I think.
Hold on. I think it's incumbent upon Justin, our resident socialism expert, to say something. I mean, it's not, I mean, were you even shocked by this, Justin? I mean, or is this kind of what you would have expected from the Bernie bros? This
is almost too easy. I don't know. I think I need a little more challenge or something. This is so prototypically far left radical socialism. I think what's interesting about this whole rant that this guy went on is that I think we all have a tendency to sort of think, well, yeah, this guy is just sort of he's just one guy with one crazy opinion who happens to be working for a very important campaign at a very important time, and that's all it is, you know. But this is the thing; it's part of a century-long tradition of socialist thinking. Like, this is not just some guy saying some crazy thing. Like, this fits right in line with what socialists have been saying and doing around the world, not just in one part of one continent or another continent, but all over the world. This is what they've been saying and doing. And it ties in logically with a lot of what socialism actually is if you take it to its logical end. Well, what is the logical end of socialism? It's if you try to force people to collectively share everything, and some people decide they don't want to do that, then you have to force those people to get with the program or re-educate them so that they get with the program.
The other thing that I thought about too is the Rasmussen poll that we conducted, where we're trying to figure out the authoritarian tendencies of the people that believed in socialism and climate alarmism. And we found that there was a pretty good correlation between those two things, and this is just a perfect example of it.
Yeah. Well, and later in the clip he says, greatest way to break a effing millionaire of their like privilege and the idea that they're superior, go out and break rocks for 12 hours a day. He's talking about putting them in gulags. You're now a working class person and you're going to learn what that means, right? You see, like that actually fits right in line with everything that you're hearing from them on the left. I mean, basically, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, all these, they demonize every problem that exists in the entire world is because of some billionaire or some person who knows a billionaire or some company or whatever. Every problem. And so all this guy is doing is just taking it one step further and saying, well, what do we do with all these billionaires? We've got to do something. We got to teach them a lesson. We got to take their wealth away. We got to do something to them. And so really, Bernie Sanders goes all the way up to that line right before you become a full-blown authoritarian dictator. And then he says, I don't want to go any further. This is it. I'm stopping here. Yeah. And this guy is just saying, I want to go one step further. That's it. That's all. It's the only difference. And then the other thing that I want to mention is that if this is the sort of person that Bernie Sanders and his campaign team are hiring to work for them, and this is just one guy who we happen to have a recording of, so we know there are others more likely than not, then what sort of people are they going to embed in the federal government who are going to be working in the bureaucratic state in Washington, D.C.? I mean, if this is the judgment that they have when they're hiring campaign staff, then I think it's totally legitimate for us to say, are you going to hire people who think like this and put them in government positions? Would it be that shocking if they did? I would be shocked if there weren't people in government positions right now that didn't agree with this guy.
Sure. Yeah, and obviously we can point to the idea that if this was a Trump supporter saying some equally outrageous thing on some campaign, we wouldn't hear the end of it. We'd be talking about it for the next year and a half.
Can you imagine if there was a Donald Trump supporter who worked in a campaign as a field organizer in an important state, who said we should round up all the Mexican Americans in the whole country and throw them in prison? Can you imagine? This guy is saying something worse than he's talking about burning down cities. If that happened, we would, as Donnie said, we would never hear the end of it. It would be nonstop, 24 hours a day.
All right, let's move on. That is an interesting clip. There's more to it. I'll link it in the show notes if you want to check that out.
Are you going to link to the Breitbart piece that said he got arrested days before that video came out?
No, arrested for what?
Wait, I didn't know about this.
Like drug paraphernalia and stuff like that. So total surprise.
Setting up a gulag in his backyard. All right.
Prepping a gulag underground.
Let's move on. I got a Tax Foundation piece in here that is, where did Americans move in 2019? This paired with a Brookings Institution piece about the growing population in America throughout the decades. But there are some interesting little facts in here. And Isaac, you brought this to my attention, so I'm going to come to you after I read this here. But it starts off saying states compete with each other in a variety of ways, including attracting and retaining residents. Sustained periods of inbound migration leads to greater economic output and growth. Prolonged periods of net outbound migration, however, constrain state coffers, contributing to revenue volatility as economic activity and tax revenue follow individuals out of state. So what basically happened here is, and I do have a chart if you want to pull that up, United Van Lines, which is the largest moving company in the United States, keeps track of all the clients moving in and out of different states of the bottom 48 states. And it publishes this data each January, comparing the numbers of inbound moves and outbound moves of each state. So the Tax Foundation took this data and created this nice chart for us to look at that shows which states are bleeding people and which states are getting people. So this chart, for those that are watching on YouTube, the lighter the state is, the worse that it's doing in terms of retaining its population. The darker the state is, the more people that are coming to it. So it looks like Idaho is doing a pretty fantastic job. Arizona as well, Texas, all those kind of deep green states. Whereas Illinois, California, New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey are all bleeding pretty horribly. So then it continues and says that our state Business Tax Climate Index uses over 100 variables to evaluate states on their competitiveness of their tax rates and structures. 4 of the top 10 worst performing states on this year's index are also among the 10 states with the most outbound migration in this year's National Movers Survey. Those include New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, California. What that doesn't include is Illinois, who apparently it doesn't have the worst tax structure, but it is horrible for a number of other reasons. So, Isaac, do you think that we can make a nice little policy correlation between what state policy is and how they can retain people and grow their populations?
I think you can take some stuff from this. It's interesting that Vermont has the highest inbound based on this map.
Yeah, right.
They have. I mean, they're crazy like Bernie, right? Crazy Bernie's from there. But I'm sure Justin can elaborate on this more. I would assume that's because people from New York are retiring and moving up to Vermont and spending all that money there. And just because, one of the things I think is interesting is that if you're close to a bad state, you tend to have higher growth. Like, I think that a lot of people from California are probably moving to Oregon or Washington because it probably fits more with their personality or their preferences. And then like the more conservative ones are probably moving to Idaho. So
Sure.
I think that, you see there's like Illinois is just this beautiful white center of like these states that are all growing that are attached to it. So yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, I don't know.
First off, Justin, is that the case with Vermont? Why is everyone going up to your the home of your favorite socialists?
Yeah, actually, Vermont is Isaac's absolutely right. The reason Vermont is so liberal is because it's full of people from New York. It's not because the native population of Vermont from, say, 100 years ago just tilted to the left. It's because people from New York move to Vermont all the time because it's a beautiful state and it's a lot cheaper than living in New York, and it's a lot nicer than upstate New York in many ways. So people from New York move to Vermont when they retire. That's a widely known thing in New England. I have lots of family in Vermont, and so they would complain about that all the time, all these people moving in from New York. I think across the country, what you're seeing is I think you can see a direct correlation between states that have more conservative policies, especially in terms of taxes, as well as cost of living and some other stuff too. I think you can see a clear connection between people moving from high tax states to states that have lower taxes. And that's not just income tax, but also property taxes and things like that. I think in Illinois, that's actually one of the biggest killers is the property tax. I think a lot of people leave Illinois for that reason alone. What I am most concerned about though here, and I've brought this up before, I think this is a major, major threat. You might even call it an existential threat to conservatism in America.
Would you call it an existential crisis?
I actually would come pretty close to calling it an existential crisis. Is that what does this mean for these states where these states that have been conservative for a long time or have at least leaned in that direction, and now they have all of these people moving in from parts of the country that are not so conservative, and they may not be moving there because they like the conservative policies. They may be moving there purely for economic reasons.
Yep.
That really scares me because it doesn't take that many states to flip from being red to blue in order for the entire political dynamic to change. And so when you look at Idaho, for example, that's number 2 on this list. Idaho is number 2. When you look at Texas, which everybody knows, I mean, Beto O'Rourke almost beat Ted Cruz in Texas. That wasn't that long ago. Florida basically decides one of a handful of states in almost every presidential election that decides who's going to win. North Carolina voted for Barack Obama, which historically would have been thought of as being inconceivable. They voted for Barack Obama, and they did vote for Trump, but it wasn't that far off. I mean, North Carolina is full of people from the Northeast who have moved down there. If these states flip, then we're going to have a gigantic political problem on the right. It's just the reality of the situation. And so I am very, very concerned for that reason, more so than anything else.
Yeah, and these trends are kind of shown also in this Brookings Institution piece that I've got that talks about how the 2010s may have seen the slowest population growth in U.S. history. This is according to census data. So it says the 2020s are beginning on the heels of a decade that saw considerable demographic stagnation. The decade's patterns reveal a nation with unprecedented growth stagnation, absolute decline in under 18 youth population, higher growth for states in the Mountain West and Southeast, low growth in the Midwest and Northeast, and population loss in 4 states. Moreover, declining growth in California should lead to its first ever loss of a congressional seat, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about, first time ever. So there's a charts in here. I didn't give these to Andy, unfortunately, but it says that the projected growth between 2010 and 2020, 7.1% population growth, which is lower than any previous decade, including the 1930s, the Great Depression years, where the nation registered a 7.3% growth. So this has got a couple of different implications. One is a political one, and it's kind of what Justin was just talking about there. And it's kind of the difference in the congressional representation. So there's a couple of states that are losing congressional seats, and there are certain states that are gaining seats. So, Jim, if you want to speak on behalf of that, there's also a policy implication that has to do with an aging baby boomer population. And as the article already kind of mentioned, a smaller, younger population. So, Jim, do you want to talk about the political angle there or the policy angle? I'll give you your choice.
Well, let me just talk a little bit about just the demographics. As somebody who's moved around a lot, I was born in New York City. I lived in Dayton, Ohio. I lived in Pittsburgh, PA. So that would explain this mug right here. And also in Virginia, where I had a job and met my wife and got married. Then I moved to California. And then in 2010, I moved here to Illinois. And so I keep moving to, the last couple of moves have been to pretty crappy states that have been losing people. And I fled California. I didn't feel like I was, emigrating to Illinois to take this job at the Heartland Institute, but I was happy to go. I mean, it was a state even 10 years ago now, golly, it's hard to think of it that way. But even 10 years ago, you could see that the state was starting to break down, that I don't mean to make it so big, but you got a sense that civilization was breaking down in California. And I think that's actually happened over the last decade. And so you are seeing people leave, and they are, as Justin said, they are moving to states like Arizona, and they're moving to Texas, and they've moved to Oregon. And so they bring these liberal policies that have ruined states like California, and then they move, and then they want to vote for the same stuff that just ruined the state they left. And so you're seeing these there. Mark Levin used to say this on his radio show a lot. And when he talked about Northern Virginia, all these liberals from Maryland would move to Virginia. He called them, they were like locusts. They'd already ruined all their state. Then they moved to another state. They're going to ruin that one. Then they'll move on to another one. And so you see these people that have elected or have put in place in their states leftist liberal policies that are financially unsustainable and that are socially unsustainable. You have California right now. It's basically, Victor Davis Hanson uses this analogy a lot. California is basically a feudal state. You have the enormously rich, the billionaires who live on the coasts and in Silicon Valley. And then in the middle of California, in the Inland Empire and in the Central Valley of California, you have extreme, in many places, you have extreme poverty, and you have a middle class that is fleeing. So it's the people fleeing California are the middle class people who have decided that this state is just unlivable now. The taxes are too high. The quality of life is too low, even though the climate is just fantastic. And they leave and they go to places like Arizona. I have good friends in Arizona who also lament the fact that it is becoming more purple than solid red. I mean, Arizona is the birthplace of Barry Goldwater, the godfather of modern conservatism. And it just elected a Democratic senator, Kristen Sinema, who is thank goodness, actually, more of a moderate Democrat. But I like Justin. I fear the changes in a lot of these key states. Florida has always been swing state because although they have traditional Southern conservatives down there, you have all these New Yorkers that have moved down, these snowbirds who finally permanently moved to Florida, and that they're also increasingly going to North Carolina as well. And so our elections, our presidential elections, are going to be even much more up in the air.
Yeah, well, I mean,
as we see these states change.
There are certain states, obviously, that they have like the weather tax, right? You'll people will be okay with paying a little bit more in terms of taxes if they could live in a state that's nicer most of the year. Isaac, you moved from Wisconsin to Minnesota. I assume that wasn't because of the weather.
No, it wasn't.
Right? It's for job prospects, and I mean, I think that's kind of what this article kind of gets into as well. I think the tax foundation piece is that financial drivers are very important when it comes to people deciding on whether or not to uproot and move to a different state as well.
Well, I mean, that's a huge commitment too, right? Because you've established all these relationships, you have friends in these areas. So it's got to get pretty bad before people are willing to say, you know what, this just isn't worth it anymore.
No.
So like there's more tolerance for that sort of stuff if you have a beautiful state like California with great weather. But what's really interesting is the tax reform bill is actually the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is acting as a catalyst for getting these people to move out of these high tax states, precisely because they got rid of a lot of the state and local tax deductions.
Right.
So SALT is what the fun acronyms that the bureaucrats came up with.
it's like these states, obviously the governors or the legislators in place, they can't change the weather as much as they think that they can.
Right.
But they can change, their tax structure and all of that stuff to make it a more financially appealing place to draw people or job prospects or anything like that to their state. So between the tax foundation, tax index, tax climate index, and Alex, rich states, poor states, it's like these are the things that these legislatures and these governors can look at to see how to make their state more palatable to people. So the other thing that I wanted to mention was the implication of the declining population growth, which is similar to what we were talking about with China, which is like that 4-to-1 ratio problem, which is the idea that there's going to be less and less of a younger population to kind of financially take care of the older population in terms of like paying into Social Security and whatnot. So is this getting to an unsustainable track, Justin, or am I just worrisome?
I think it's a huge problem. I think it's a gigantic problem. Most of the time when people talk about Social Security, or they talk about Medicare or something, and they talk about how fiscally unsustainable it is, they leave out the most important part, which is that demographic change is only going to get more dramatic as time goes on. It's not going to get better. At least that's not how it looks right now. I mean, obviously that might change, but people who are in my generation are not having lots of kids. Many of them don't have kids, in fact. Most of the people I know who are my age do not have kids. So they're waiting until they get older to have kids, which means they end up having fewer kids, which means that when people get to be older, who is going to take care of them? I mean, really, when you think about it, when my generation is in their 70s, there's going to be even fewer people to take care of those people. So we are headed down a very unsustainable path. And it would be possible to plan for all of this, of course, if we had a better system in place. But the problem with the system we have now is it's a defined benefit system, which means you get benefits from the government regardless of all of these other factors. They're going to give them to you no matter what, no matter how bad things are financially, no matter what the deficit is, no matter how bad things are for the economy. They're going to keep giving you those benefits. That's the promise. And so how is this all going to work out 50 years from now? I just don't see how it's possible.
So I think we could take a step to fixing this. Homework for us all over between now and next week. We should all have children. So let's Andy, get on that. Isaac, get on that. Jim, get on that. I'm doing my.
It's true. Literally, nobody on this podcast has kids.
I know. It's kind of. I was thinking.
Isn't that nobody here has kids?
Well, I'm worried about the climate, problem. Man.
Yeah, right. I'm following, AOC's
the business climate.
All right, let's move on. I want to touch on one more topic here. Definitely not going to have time for my proposed bill of the week.
Should we just do the proposed bill of the week and call it a show?
You don't want to talk about healthcare? Do you want to do proposed bill of the week or healthcare?
I like the proposed bill of the week. We can save healthcare.
Yeah, let's. I agree. Yeah, let's.
You sure?
Yes, I'm sure. Right. I can do healthcare anytime, man. Anytime.
We'll save it. All right, fine. Proposed bill of the week is something I've been teasing for weeks here. It's gonna be such like a anticlimactic.
It's like proposed bill of the quarter.
I like that.
All right. Vermont bill would ban cell phone use by anyone younger than 21. It says that a bill introduced in Vermont's legislature would prohibit anyone under 21 years old from using or possessing a cell phone.
Possessing?
Yeah.
Wow.
However, the bill appears to be more about gun rights than mobile phones. The legislation introduced Tuesday by Democratic Senator John Rogers says those under the age of 21, quote, are not developmentally mature enough to possess and use cell phones safely. The bill cites fatal car crashes and bullying among teens as reason for the proposal. So this seems to be like kind of one of those like jokey type things. Like I'm trying to make a point by introducing this legislation. So I think it's a point worth discussing, which is kind of like, when do you become an adult in this day and age? Is it 18 or is it 21? Because I think like historically it's probably even been earlier than 18. But in this day and age, similar to all the things that we were just talking about with waiting to have kids and all of that, the Arrested Development that I talked about last week, I wonder if it's time to just, say, no, it's 21. Thoughts? Let's start with Jim, the most senior of our people here.
Gosh, so the question is, when does somebody become an adult? In our society, probably not till you're 35. I mean, we're talking about Arrested Development.
I don't think anybody else on the podcast is 35, Jim.
Well, all right, I'm 49. I mean,
so you're the only adult?
I'm the only adult. I'm the only adult on this podcast. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure I owned property before you did, Jim.
Well, that is true. That is true. But we probably need to put this podcast on the Nickelodeon YouTube channel at this point. But
I'm about to get slimed.
No, I mean, gosh, I think the things that Justin talked about is actually very true, and it's not just his generation, the millennials, but Generation X, my generation, have also had fewer children. We tended to get married later than our parents did. I got married at the age of 30, and that's, I think, the average age now of millennials getting married. And this is going to have an enormous impact. And I think the idea of so should we now move the when you're talking about being adult, you're talking about basically the age of consent or the age of autonomy, right? And
sure.
The argument's always, and it was in the 1960s and 70s when they had the draft, that oh great, I can be drafted to die in Vietnam, but I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this other thing. And so we made it 18 across the board, but then we had 21. You had to be 21 to drink, and the federal government imposed that policy on every state in the union by tying federal highway funds to raising the drinking age to 21. And so now we have all these things. Well, vaping should be 21, and now owning a cell phone should be 21. I mean, these things are never going to fly. I'd actually like to see everything go back to 18, and I would like to see 18-year-olds be given full adult autonomy and have to take responsibility for their lives, which means, for one thing, not being on your parents' health insurance until, what is it, 23 or is it 29?
25.
25. Right? I mean, come on. I mean, you're not a child at the age of 25. You should be living on your own at 25. You should have had your own job at 25. And you shouldn't be on your parents' health insurance like you're a 10-year-old when you're 25 years old. So we're infantilizing adults, young adults in this country, and I don't think we're doing anybody any favors for that. Because the longer you wait to take responsibility for your life, the less successful your life, frankly, is going to be. And my model for this, and I mean this sincerely, Isaac, is you. I mean, the fact that you own property and you've basically started your own business in your 20s. I must not be wrong when I say that you found yourself a bit of an anomaly among your peers.
Well, yeah, but I've been working on the farm since before then. So I'm just better than my peers.
Classic farm arrogance right there.
That's right.
Classic farm arrogance.
Salt of the earth farm boys.
I had worked more in my life by the time I was 10 than Justin's worked in his whole life.
It's probably true.
Probably.
It's probably true. I think that, to be honest, I don't really care what the age is, so long as it's consistent. It's the lack of consistency that bothers me. You can't say that you can't drink alcohol, but you can get drafted, or you can't drink alcohol, but you can buy a gun, or you can't vape, but you can't.
They want to make the voting age 16.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's the thing, right? The same people that want to say you're not responsible enough to own a cell phone until you're 21, or to drink alcohol, or to vape, can vote. I mean, that's insane.
The leader of the free world,
right? Because who cares about that? Vaping is so much more dangerous than presidents. So
it's true that they don't think voting is that big a deal.
I mean, seriously, though, that's the whole point, though. There's no consistency. There's no logic to it. I just want them to make a logical, coherent argument. Jim made a logical, coherent argument. You may disagree that 18 is the right age. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's at least consistent, and that's what I want. I just want consistency. Whatever. It could be 25. It wouldn't matter to me. Just make it consistent.
Yeah, and I would make it consistent with the voting age. If these lefties want to make vape, you got to be 21 to vape, then you got to be 21 to vote. I mean, but they want to go the other way because they want. I think I don't really think. I mean, frankly, I was excited to vote when I was 18. I mean, yeah, I'm a nerd like Alex P. Keaton on Family Ties or something, but being 18 and voting was actually pretty exciting to me. But an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, should they really be, choosing the leader of the free world? I mean, don't you need a little bit more maturity and a little bit more experience in life before you make such a big decision? And if we're going to apply that to vaping and all this other stuff, it should apply to voting as well. We should not go back to the 17th century where only, white male landowners got to vote. But the principle, the concept at stake here was that there were people who had stake in the future of the country because they own land. And so they should be the ones deciding who our leaders should be. Now we've gone, thankfully, to universal suffrage. That's a positive thing. But yes, Justin, we should be consistent about it. If you're an adult, you're an adult, and it should apply to everything. And the government should get out of your way. And you should be able to choose your government that is imposing these laws on you.
So last week, Isaac made reference to Austin Powers. This week, Jim made reference to Alex B. Keaton. So good job, guys, with being timely with your references.
I am the old guy here, so yeah, I saw that on TV, unlike you guys.
I'm wondering if okay, so I completely agree. Got to be consistent. Whatever, pick a date. 18, 21. It has to be consistent across the board. I wonder though, what's the other thing that they always talked about with like 20? You have to be like 26 to rent a car. 25 to rent a car. That's not based on law though. Is that like
insurance actually?
But is that law or is it just like the private?
That's based on actuaries saying this is when people are statistically less likely to get into an accident.
Right, but that's not codified in any type of law, correct?
No, it's just policy.
Able to rent cars below age 25 in certain scenarios.
Okay, so then that's consistent as well.
But you pay more.
And I just wonder though, if everything was okay, let's say we all did this grand compromise. We set everything at 21. Does that mess with like you signing on to getting like student loans? Because if you're like well underneath the age of 21, it's kind of, you can't really consent to a contract like that, right? So would that just like totally screw over that whole thing?
No, what it would do is it would force the government to change the rules so that the parent becomes completely responsible for all of the student loan right from the very beginning.
Okay.
That's what would happen. So I mean, right now, the way the system works is students can loan out a certain amount of money from the federal government before they get to grad school. So when they're in undergraduate school, they can loan out a certain amount of money guaranteed from the federal government. They'll give it to you basically no matter what, unless you've defaulted or something prior to that. And then the rest, the difference, which can be very sizable depending on what school you went to, has to be covered by your parents basically through a Parent Plus loan. So they give the parent basically any loan that they need in order to make that happen. So what this would do is it would essentially make it impossible for the federal government to have the student have any loan. It would all be under the parent's name, and the parent would be fully responsible for the loan.
Right.
And that's what inevitably would happen.
Interesting stuff. That's the proposed bill of the week. It's not going to actually pass. I just thought it was kind of an interesting thing to talk about. Gentlemen, any words of wisdom, any last jokes, anecdotes, notes to get off your chest or anything like that before we sign off for the week? Not even a Go Packers. Wow, I'm surprised, Isaac. All right, folks. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of In the Tank podcast. Tune in every Friday for a new episode of In the Tank. If you like our show, please subscribe and write a review for us on iTunes. That would be greatly appreciated. You could also find us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, of course. That's the one that we're really trying to get up big here. So share that video. We'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like, you could follow us on Twitter at In the Tank Pod. If you want us to send us your comments, suggestions, jokes, anecdotes, whatever you'd like, email us at inthethankpodcast@gmail.com. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Twitter. Look for the big, beautiful blue check mark.
And unfollow him. Isaac Orr, where can the fine people find you?
On Twitter at The Fracking Guy and at AmericanExperiment.org.
And Jim Lakely, same question.
You can find me on Twitter at J Lakely. Also follow the Heartland Institute at Heartland Inst.
Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week.
All right. That was great.
Yeah, that was